session of CME Palooza Fall. I am Scott Kober, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza, and I would like to welcome you to this session, which is entitled "You Can't Do That in CME," which is the session is sponsored by Prova Education. So as we do before all of our sessions, I would like to recognize our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Academic CME and Med Learning Group, our silver sponsors, ASIM, Creative Educational Concepts, Global Education Group, Haymarket Medical Education, Infograph Ed, Medscape Education, Physicians Education Resource, and Prova Education. And finally, our many bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Antidote Education Company, Catalyst Medical Education, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, Global Academy for Medical Education, Helio.com Education Lab, Integrity Continuing Education, Integritas Communications, Peer Audience, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, Primary Care Network, Paradigm Medical Communications, PVI, RedMed Ed, RMEI, and Vindico Medical Education. So brief information about disclosures, information for our speakers. So the opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed by our presenters are their own and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, parent company, or affiliates. So there are two ways to ask questions during this and all CME Palooza sessions. You can use the CME Palooza text line to send in a question to 267-6660-CME, that's 0263, or you can tweet your question to us using the CME Palooza hashtag. We will get to as many questions as we can throughout the session, so please ask as many questions as you would like. So for those of you who grew up in the 80s, as I did, you may remember a television show called You Can't Do That on Television. So this is our You Can't Do That on CME session. So during the show, You Can't Do That on Television, when someone said, I don't know, there was green slime that would come down on them. Or if they said water, a glass of water would pour down onto them. So we will be keeping track during this session of how frequently our panelists get slimed or watered. And not quite sure what we'll do with it, but you know, we can kind of all keep track of that. So with that, I am going to turn this over to our moderator, Amanda Glazer. And Amanda is going to introduce the rest of our panelists and get this session kicked off. So Amanda, go ahead.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. We're very excited to share with you how our three esteemed panelists have been able to think outside of the box and really look beyond our traditional CME CE programs to provide some unique formats and delivery methods to their learners. And so I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and give a little background about their position and their affiliation.
So this is Peggy Paulson. Yeah, Peggy Paulson. I'm an operations manager at Mayo Clinic School of Continuous Professional Development. We are a joint accredited provider and hold several other credit types. We offer just over 700 activities a year. The one we're going to talk about today is kind of an exciting topic and near and dear to everybody's heart. So,
great, thank you, Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara Classens. I'm the manager of provider relations and continuing medical education at Munson Healthcare. I'm located in northern Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan. We are a 9-hospital healthcare system. And I manage kind of that healthcare's CME office. And what we'll talk about today is kind of one of our maybe 200 programs that we run throughout our system. And we are accredited by our state medical society, the Michigan State Medical Society.
Great, thank you. And Marcy.
Hi, I'm Marcy Felsted. I'm the Associate Director for CME at the University of Utah. We run about 300 CME activities a year, and I'm excited to be here and see everyone.
Okay, thank you. So each of our panelists are going to go through their unique formats of education that they've presented to their learners. So if you have questions on that particular topic or that particular activity, please don't wait to ask your questions. Send them in and we will get to them as soon as we can. So for that, I'm going to hand it over to Peggy.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I am going to talk to you about social media in CME. And, you know, one of those things that you can't do has to do with trying to teach around social media. If you want to go to the next slide. So some background on this, social media has been a growing trend over the years. Mayo Clinic has been teaching internally since about 2011, kind of the do's and don'ts with social media and what you can do. That focus was really around trying to keep us all safe internally and kind of giving us rules. They found that there was some need, though, to move beyond just our internal education, which did not offer any CME at that time. It was focused on social media basics. So what is it? How do you use it? We're moving beyond that these days, but we do talk about various popular networking sites and things that places to go, places that you might get your voice heard, where our patients and learners might be posting items, how they can be used in healthcare. So how can you use social media in a healthcare setting to really provide some good information out to the public, and some of the expertise that we have within our organization and getting that out. Around online professionalism. So when we talk about the do's and don'ts, sometimes when we get into social media, we tend to be a little less formal. And when we get less formal, we sometimes border on the line of being not professional. So we talk a little bit about how an individual can and should present themselves in social media so they don't run into professionalism issues. And then how social media sort of very basically can impact ROI. Or return on investment. So, you know, you put time and effort into it, and what is some of the return on that? So the trained providers really, it sort of expands beyond just the physician, really gets to the whole team, but anybody who's trained in how to really deal with social media and how to stay within that professionalism space really has a potential to improve the quality of information that patients and consumers pick up every day as they're out, you know, working through Facebook or Twitter or whatever other social media sites they happen to be on. Next slide. So the format was switched from kind of a live internal only course, and it was created as an enduring material in 2015. So to help spread it outside of the Mayo Clinic walls, we collaborate with a partner that created it using an online delivery tool that really met the needs of what we were looking for. Next slide. So we learned some lessons, and this might not be surprising. We have lower than expected physician engagement, which I think for us is a little disappointing. We would like to see higher engagement, but we do see lots of other team members, the physician assistants, nurse practitioners, nurses, and others who are definitely engaging. We also see a trend, as we do with lots of enduring materials, and you all probably see the same thing, completion of the activity. So, you know, sort of starting but never really getting through all of the content. So we have, you know, a percentage of people who aren't really finishing what they started. They might get what they need and then sort of stop. Some of our successes have to do with when the learners get through the content, they really like the content, they find it valuable and helpful for what they're doing. And it fulfills that knowledge gap of how to use some of these sites that they may not have known before. Next slide.
So Peggy, are there any was there any concrete outcomes that you were able to gain or glean from this particular activity?
Not necessarily. I think we, you know, our major one of our major goals was to get the information out. I think we are getting the information out around the professionalism piece, which I think was a significant driver for this, and you know, getting people to use the social media in a way that really sort of presents their practices, so how they would normally interact with consumers and patients and learners, rather than you know, kind of a more casual, you know, kind of on that borderline.
And have you seen any, I guess, the increases with the healthcare professionals? Have they really taken this to heart and gone into the social media realm with communicating with their patients and consumers?
Yeah, I think it is happening. There's more and more organizations like ours that, you know, are allowing the providers to be out there in that space to help share and tweet and YouTube and, you know, do all those kinds of things with, you know, even snippets of content to really get valuable, sort of scientifically based healthcare information out to learners and consumers.
Great, Scott. Were there any questions for activity?
Not yet. So I think, you know, one of the questions, you know, that we have for kind of all of you guys is, you know, what are the challenges to, or what were the challenges to potentially, you know, to accredit something like this, of, you know, identifying the gaps that needed to be filled and, you know, fulfilling the ACCME criteria to make sure that this, you know, fit under, you know, this sort of qualified as an accredited activity?
Yeah, so I think it's always a challenge, you know, especially back when we started this in 2015, and you're really sort of bordering on spaces where you're like, well, can we really do that and count that for CME? I think nowadays, you know, in 2019, it's a lot easier than it was back when we were trying to do it in 2015. And there was a lot of questions and back and forth with some of our accrediting bodies to how do we really make this work? Like, what do we really need to focus on for content, and how do we really, you know, sort of twist it so that we can educate based on this particular topic?
Okay, great. Mandy, I mean, you know, we can move on to the next segment of this presentation. So Kara, go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Kara Classens. I am going to talk about something we did in our healthcare system in our region. It's not necessarily an innovation across the country. Actually, out in California, the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives is a similar concept. And more of this kind of idea of culinary medicine is showing up in our medical schools and our residency programs. But what we kind of took the unique opportunity to do is bring our current medical staff into the mix of the idea of culinary medicine training and community engagement by leveraging CME. So next slide, please. You can see on the map there, I kind of let you know I'm from Traverse City, Michigan, so that's northern Michigan there. And our healthcare system serves the entire kind of tip of the mitt area. we're really lucky because we live in a pretty fertile farmland. We have a lot of kind of resource support programs for food access, for fresh foods, and a really a plethora of community resources throughout our area. So what we actually did was bring a couple of our entities together in our area to talk about how do we make better connections between our food chain supply, our farmers, and wellness. And so that's kind of how I was brought into the mix. Munson Healthcare, one of the players. Another community player is an agency in our area called Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities. And that group really focuses a lot on policy surrounding community wellness in general. And then we're also very fortunate to have a community college that has a culinary institute here. So we also partnered with our Great Lakes Culinary Institute. And these three players really put together kind of the think tank of what has become a culinary medicine conference in our area. You can go to the next slide. So like I said, this conference, so we've had several iterations of it, and it's kind of evolved, and that's kind of where my work from the CME perspective has come in. So you can see on the screen the timeline of what we've done. In 2014, Groundwork Center really launched the first Farms, Food, and Health Conference, kind of highlighting those three areas. In 2016, the CME office was brought into the mix. With a kind of a provider track, if you will. And I was very new to the industry and kind of a yes man at that point, and didn't really know what I was doing. And looking back, kind of the quality of what we presented there wasn't great, but it certainly served to get us in the door to continue the conversations. And then we evolved into really the biggest project that we worked on, which was the launch of our 2017 Culinary Medicine Conference. And that Culinary Medicine Conference was a standalone conference that it was 3 days long. Our Great Lakes Culinary Institute folks hosted that, and we were able to provide, I think it was close to 18 CME credits for attendance. And that's really the bulk of what I'll talk about as far as kind of the creation. And then I'm proud to say that 2 weeks ago, we just finished our 2019 Culinary Medicine Conference, in which we incorporated our ideas in a culinary medicine training track within the Farms, Food, and Health Conference. So that was really a unique opportunity to have farmers, local food experts, food chain supply experts, as well as medical professionals, all intermingling with the education provided, meeting the needs of each unique group. Talking a little bit about that single culinary medicine conference, it was a real challenge. And when you talk about kind of the criteria and the ACCME criteria, one of my kind of favorite parts or favorite stories from the creation of this conference was at one point, I remember kind of saying, okay, we need to elevate this, and let's see what we can do. And we got together, and the meeting included a man named Fred Laughlin. So Fred was the director of a culinary institute, and several other players from Groundwork and myself representing the healthcare system. And I remember going into that meeting kind of feeling starstruck. I'm a foodie here in Northern Michigan, and I've always been interested in cooking. And so to be sitting at a table and thinking, oh my gosh, CME has brought me to this meeting with this chef in our area, and it was just kind of a unique experience. But that was really the think tank, and what we did was we took what we thought should happen at this conference, and I really became a conduit in my job to bring this back to our providers and say, hey, here's what we think we can do, but what do you actually need to hear? So between those focus group meetings and a lot of back and forth conversation, we ended up having a meeting of the minds. One of the things that we really intended to do, and we've been successful, is use our community health needs assessment. So that's a requirement of our institution as a nonprofit hospital, is to carry out, execute, and make public a community health needs assessment. And so it was really interesting for me to be able to use that to illustrate the practice gaps we needed to address. So practice gaps on kind of a community health, population health outcomes basis. So for our 2017 conference, our community health needs assessment showed obesity and diabetes as major areas of focus for our hospital and our region. And so when I brought that to the table, we really focused on our actual training kitchens. We set up disease-specific training kitchens. So we had a training kitchen focusing on diabetes, and we also had one focusing on cardiovascular health, all with different curriculums based on that community health needs assessment. We then transformed our content for this last iteration, again using our community health needs assessment for practice gap data, and saw that behavioral health and mental health was a new major focus. We were able to bring curriculum ideas surrounding nutritional psychiatry and food for mental health and mental well-being into kind of weaving that kind of emerging science into our culinary medicine training. So I think that I think one of the best things we have done is kind of use that community health needs assessment to meet those ACCME criteria with practice gap information, educational needs through focus groups, and really kind of using the CME office as a bridge to bring our medical providers into the conversation. So it wasn't just community members, saying what they think people need to hear. It was a real effort to ensure that the content and curriculum we developed met those educational needs of our providers and were relevant, was relevant information to our audience. The other thing that came up that was kind of an interesting conversation was, the culinary medicine training really says food is medicine. And so then we really had a robust discussion about, okay, if we're proposing that food is medicine, do these food procurers have a conflict of interest then? And of course, we haven't answered that. And I think there's a long way to go in American healthcare to answer that. But it was really interesting. And it was interesting to be able to teach these community entities about the cycle of CME, about practice gaps and educational needs, your educational intervention, and then measuring outcomes, and bring new people into the mix as far as learning about how to carry out quality CME. And I think we can go to the next slide. So I guess the bottom line is this has worked, and it's looking to be pretty sustainable in our area. The picture you see on the screen is one of the sessions we hosted, which was a tour of our local farmers market. This was a guided tour, and you can see Fred Laughlin there in his chef coat. Next to him in the green is a woman named Andrea Romine. She's a farmer. And then we actually were able to, in 2017, have our keynote was Dr. David Eisenberg. And Dr. Eisenberg is a real proponent of culinary medicine and actually a leader at the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives conference. And so he was here as a keynote and participated in this farmers market tour where we focused on food security. We focused on food access programs. So training our providers on what community resources are out there as far as access to healthy fruits and vegetables with various subsidy type programs at our farmers market. And that was a real highlight. Next slide. So I talked about Dr. Eisenberg, and this is really kind of his quote here, I think really illustrates where I feel like the power of CME came into the mix. I won't read the whole thing, but really what he was getting at is, he kind of thought he was just invited to be a keynote. He ended up participating in our whole 2017 conference, and he says that our area, might just be the place that will reinvent or invent the future of a healthy, resilient community. And, when he provides that quote, someone of his caliber, I really felt like leveraging that power of accredited medical education and the cycle of creating accredited medical education really was the way to bring our medical providers into the conversation about healthy, resilient communities, and this conversation about culinary medicine. I think next slide has a few things about our outcomes. So we do have some longitudinal outcomes in the works. So we are following a couple of our participants as far as practice change. Of course, we're following the health outcomes in our community. And we have a couple of programs that were launched as a part of this, which one being a fruit and vegetable prescription program. A grant-supported program there where our physicians are actually able to leverage those subsidy programs and prescribe fruit and vegetables to their patients, who are then able to tap into our local farmers markets as well as some extension cooking classes to get patient education, and bringing our providers in through CME and allowing them to kind of understand those programs as well as cook the food so they can also support their patients in that way was a powerful outcome. We do think that we'll continue to be kind of a grantee for our large Michigan Health Endowment grant. We also are kind of seeing that physicians are seeing themselves in a different light related to this as kind of vital leaders in community health. I also felt like, it empowered me as a CME and continuing professional development professional to get out into the community and speak on the behalf of our providers and really bring them into the conversation. Of course, it was great to work with chefs and learn myself, and something I never really thought I would be able to do. And I think one of the biggest outcomes is we've brought a new group into the mix of understanding accredited CME and its importance and kind of power in our healthcare system. So I think that's all. I don't think I have more slides.
Wow, I think that's the end of your slide. So Kara, there are a couple questions that came in. I think that this is really an innovative, interesting program. So here's one of the questions that came in. This is great. Was there any consideration in making this an interprofessional activity by including nutritionists, dietitians, and nurses, among others, who are involved in nutrition decisions for patients?
Absolutely. So my counterpart at Groundwork is actually a registered dietitian. So although our office, our healthcare system did not provide the credits that the registered dietitians use, we did have those available. And in our kitchen sessions, our faculty consisted of a physician, a dietitian, and a chef. So those were our three faculty members presenting the information. So absolutely, dietitians were a major part of curriculum development, as well as kind of getting those professional development credits.
Okay. Now, what kind of attendance did you have at the various programs?
So I am not certain about our first iterations, but in 2017 we had 80 providers, and this last year we had 60.
Wow. Okay. Great. Amanda, you have any questions you wanna ask?
Kara, I do have a question. I do. Could you go through just a little bit about the format of the conferences? It sounds like there were some cooking sessions. Was there some didactic lectures? What were the different formats offered during that conference?
Sure. So the two biggest conferences that we've run, the 2017 iteration had a component that had a kind of a lecture style keynote and panel discussion. The bulk of the day was spent in a couple excursions. So the farmers market tour was one excursion. We did a tour of our local co-op grocery store as part of the excursions to talk about accessibility, healthy choices, shopping options, kind of bang for your buck when you're in the grocery store. And then we came back to the Culinary Institute, and the bulk of the sessions were hands-on cooking sessions with a curriculum developed per that kitchen and the faculty that I kind of described before. And then we ended the weekend with a couple of kind of didactic lecture sessions. We did the same thing in this past iteration in 2019, but added a few more. We added like a research briefing, so kind of state of the research in culinary medicine. Like I said, we added that nutritional psychiatry component, so mental health and mental well-being. And we did a few crossover sessions with the Farms Food and Health group that we were able to accredit for CME. So that's where kind of the farmers and the food chain folks and food supply experts, plus our physicians, were able to kind of come together and learn about community resources or innovative programming or research happening.
So Kara, we have one other question that has come in.
Okay.
So basically they're asking what levels of global compliance review was necessary. Oh, that's for a different program. All right.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
Okay, here's this question. Were there attendees from outside of Munson Healthcare? And were there non-physician attendees as well? And I think you've sort of answered a little bit of both of those. So how did you attract attendees from outside of Munson Healthcare, especially for the initial iterations?
Did you say how did we attract attendees, or did we?
How did you?
Well, we did, and we actually leveraged our connections. Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities had a lot of connections throughout our state. And I think our intention really is to make this, have this evolve to be more of kind of a national spotlight type conference. But of course, my shtick, and I'm always kind of the person at the table saying, yes, but let's look at our community needs. Let's look at our local medical providers' practice gaps and needs, and how this impacts our local community data. But we did spread the word throughout the state to various hospitals and healthcare systems throughout the state, as well as other connections. So there was quite a few who attended outside of Munson.
Okay, and what one last question that came in is someone saying, I would love to introduce this program at my hospital, in my community. How do you suggest I get started?
So I think one of the best things is to have a community partner who's a mover and a shaker. So healthcare systems, I think, traditionally are a little bit they're complex. There's a lot of levels of approvals and conversation that need to happen. And I think one of the things that pushed us the most is that Groundwork Center pushes the envelope. They're a fast-paced organization. And that really helped us get off the ground with some out-of-the-box thinking and kind of procuring those first couple conferences.
Okay, great.
Other question pop up on my screen.
Okay, what was that?
It says, has there been any discussion around including patients and or families in planning? So two things that we're already talking about for next time is the inclusion of patients and families in the planning, and kind of just what the demographic of that will be. The other thing we want to bring into the mix is the conversation around payers and billing. And this is all great information, but can our family medicine providers, are payers interested in kind of preventative medicine and this well-being tenet as part of kind of annual visits or whatnot? And how can we push our payers so that our family medicine practitioners, internal medicine practitioners, et cetera, can be reimbursed for these conversations?
Okay, great. Well, maybe now we'll shift over to Marcy. If there are more questions that come in, we can circle back. I want to make sure we have enough time for the final segment of this presentation.
Hi there. So I'm having kind of a hard time hearing people. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
That anyone interrupts me. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so I was asked to talk a little bit about Schwartz Rounds, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what Schwartz Rounds are. So Schwartz Rounds are something run by the Schwartz research center for compassionate care. And basically, it's like a Grand Round series, but the focus is really on the human dimension of our healthcare providers. So it's gives our providers an opportunity to share their experiences, thoughts, and feelings on thought-provoking topics drawn from actual patient cases that either they see within their clinic or maybe common kind of patient cases that happen. But the premise is that if our healthcare providers are better able to make personal connections with patients and colleagues, then they'll be able to do that better if they have greater insight into their own responses and feelings. And so why you might want to do Schwartz Rounds is to help build individual and team strategies for dealing with stress and frustration, isolation. You might be focused on wanting to build your compassionate care by taking care of your providers a little bit better. And basically what it looks like is just a patient case discussion. There'll be a panel of 3 or 4 providers, different kinds of providers. So it's meant to include everyone who might come in contact with any kind of patient. So it could be a receptionist, it could be the people who empty the trash for you, all the way up to, and not hierarchical, of course, but including everyone from medical assistants to radiology techs to billers, through nursing, physicians, pharmacists, everyone involved in that patient care team. And they'll just talk about a certain topic that has been assigned for that session and maybe review a couple specific patients that have happened. And the focus is really on the emotional impact of the healthcare provider work that we all do. So in Utah, we first started this at Primary Children's Hospital. They first attempted to put it into place in 2012, and there wasn't great support, not a lot of great attendance at the beginning. And so they kind of dialed it back a little bit and then rebuilt with some collaboration. So they got a lot more buy-in from other departments and different people within the Primary Children's Hospital network, and then relaunched in April 2013. And then the University of Utah, where I work, added a session in February 2016. And then Huntsman Cancer put their Schwartz Rounds into action in October of 2016. And then St. Mark's, which is one of our regional hospitals, added in November 2016. And then the VA started their sessions in January of 2018. So Schwartz Rounds in and of itself can be a little bit different. I believe there's somewhere around 400 Schwartz Rounds happening throughout our country. But one thing that Utah has done differently is that we built a collaborative Schwartz community of practice in early 2016. So all 5 of these hospitals got together, the planners who are picking the cases and organizing the panels, all got together and shared tips about how do we moderate these sessions? How do we get people to come? What concepts are you talking about? And so that was sort of a unique thing that Utah did that makes it a little bit different. And so that community of practice really becomes unique because in the traditional marketplace, the 5 hospitals that are involved are competitors for patient care. And so for us to sort of put aside that competition and come together to try to build a culture of compassionate care throughout our state was kind of a big deal, and super exciting. And the people who are involved in planning the Schwartz Rounds tend to be compassionate people anyway who want to work on provider burnout and resilience and build more compassionate care across all of our coworkers anyway. So they were sort of excited to come together and see how other people are doing it. So that leadership committee is made up of social workers, chaplains, nurses, and physicians. So it's an interprofessional approach also within the community of practice. And their shared common goal that they decided in some of their first meetings was to increase compassion in healthcare. And the way that they do that is through the Schwartz Compassionate Rounds. So it's just kind of an interesting approach. And then the outcomes that we've learned is from our series, just our Schwartz Rounds outcomes. Learners really, really enjoy it. We do think that it's increasing compassionate care within Utah, but sort of the individual comments have been really positive and helpful. People often leave the Schwartz Rounds breathing better, feeling a little more relaxed, like they're maybe not alone, that there's other people that are dealing with this with them as well, and dealing with some of the emotional burdens that we carry as healthcare providers. So that's exciting. The community of practice that we put together also has some outcomes where we've built just a stronger community of moderators and facilitators of sometimes difficult conversations. So they've shared potential common topics. So they're able to talk about, like, yeah, we had microaggressions come up for us too. Isn't it interesting that we're all facing these kind of issues? Or they'll share techniques for how do we engage an audience? How do we get them to talk about safety at work? Or how do we get different providers to talk about how they respond when patients ask them about Dr. Google, or sharing tips and tricks. And then attending and learning from each other's rounds. So everyone within this community of practice is able to go to the other rounds and sort of see how they do it. Maybe they're doing something a little bit differently. Are their audiences engaging in a different way? And how can I build that into my sessions? And that's especially helpful when you're first implementing a Schwartz Rounds. If you're able to go and kind of see the impact, it's hard to sort of describe how important this can be and how valuable it can be for others. So it's great to be able to go and see it and see that, yes, across all different professions within the patient care team, people are connecting to these same issues. We all want to provide good, compassionate care. And how can we do that? And then other outcomes that are awesome for us is that we've been able to talk about our Schwartz Rounds in our community of practice at several national meetings, including today. And so then our challenges and successes, you really do need champions within your institution to make the Schwartz Round successful. You really do need that buy-in, and it's really important to get that. And then one of the successes that we found within the series and the community of practice is if you can really center it around a specific patient case or specific story that's occurred within your institution, you're going to get more sort of gripping onto what you're talking about and more engaged learning with that. There is a real fear of sharing, both within the series, expressing your vulnerability about, maybe something that you wish you'd done better. And then within that community of practice also, so how do we share across those competition lines without crossing any boundaries? And it does provide just an excellent place to practice moderation skills. And then I think the most important success that we've had is just learning to collaborate with each other within that community practice, and getting support and mentoring each other. That's just really critical. And then the Schwartz Center itself provides a lot of excellent resources and collaborative materials. So that's what we've done with that. And I'm not really sure why I am not hearing people.
Well, we're just coming back onto the stream. Do you hear us now?
I can hear you, Scott. Thank you.
Okay. So here's a question that came in. So with 5 community hospitals collaborating on this program, how was it determined who was going to take on responsibility as far as providing the CME and all of those materials?
So because it originally started out as sort of independent series, each institution went through their normal CME process. It just so happened that our institution, the University of Utah, provides credit for the University of Utah and the Huntsman Center, St. Mark's, and we started out helping the VA sort of get their CME off the ground, and then they went with their own CME provider. So in the beginning, our institution actually offered the credit for 4 of the 5. But we were more than happy to sort of share that out, right? So now the VA goes through their own system kind of thing. So we just sort of followed our own structures through that. And then when the community of practice came together, it really is, there's not really one leader. It's a collaborative approach to leading. Excuse me. So hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, great. I have kind of a global question for everyone that came in, but Amanda, do you have any other questions about the Schwartz Round specifically before I sort of ask the global question? I think Amanda's having some audio issues, perhaps.
I do. So,
Okay,
Marcy, were there any accredits, especially when you're talking about a topic area that is our standard,
Yeah. So Amanda's question was if there are accreditation challenges, and I would say in the beginning with that first event, there were challenges. And that's because we weren't really used to talking about emotional care and compassionate care for our providers and wellness and resilience and things like that. And so we did have some conversations and discussions about, is this content valid for CME? And we spent a lot of time talking about that early on. But I think as we sort of built the community and we kind of got providers on board with understanding what this is and that it is really helpful for providers to be able to provide compassionate care if they can share their own emotional situations and things that are happening. It hasn't been such an issue. So I think just kind of going back to what Carol was talking about, like the more you talk about it and the more we can educate others on what CME is and how it works, that it really helps you in the future. So I'm glad that we spent that time kind of figuring that out and sharing with others and talking about that. But yeah, that was our biggest challenge.
So I sort of have a global question for each of you. So some, if not all of these programs kind of started out as non-accredited education. So why did your offices, or why did you in particular feel that it was important to kind of evolve these as accredited programs, and sort of how has that helped these programs, grow and succeed? Peggy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think over time the community has changed to allow for some of these other things beyond, the strict, I'm going to treat the patient in this medical setting. And, we do a lot here at our organization with humanities and medicine, and just expanding out. I think, it was a combination of where we were going from a CME perspective, and where the communities and what the learners were asking for. How do I do something better to make life better for others? So I think it was a combination, and I think, about the time that we started to do this was that time when all of those things were coming together. I think now in 2019, there's even more of those opportunities to sort of expand beyond the traditional sort of let's do the textbook kind of training and give them credit for that. We really need to make well-rounded providers and really give them credit for other things that really impact their practices.
Okay. Kara?
Yeah, so I would agree. I also felt strongly that, we had a group of providers in our community who were at one point maybe considered in medicine kind of like the crunchy, they're the choir. They're who already know that healthy diets impact disease and chronic disease management. And what I really felt like CME could do is bring some credibility to this and science to this concept. So it wasn't just kind of, the one or two, organic, healthy vegetarian doctors in our community who could look at the science behind food as medicine. And I felt like adding that CME credit and really going back to where is the research evolving, where is the science evolving, and putting a structure behind it would bring that credibility to the content and transform it into something that could really be encompassing for the medical community.
Okay. Marcy, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with both of those comments. I think that's really great. I think for us it's been helpful to be on the side of our providers. So we work a lot about showing our value within our institution. And so this was one more way where we could say, hey, we're in support of you and we think this is important that you're a well-rounded person. And so we're going to do what we can to help you, and we'll be part of that process. So I think that was really important for us too.
Okay. Amanda, any other questions you want to ask of the team?
Yeah, just one question. Do any of you have any other up and coming out of the box activities that you're working on?
Well, now I'm thinking about culinary medicine and social media. So.
Schwartz Rounds.
Yeah, I'm with Marcy. I have the same thought, but we actually do a lot with humanities in medicine here. It's not always accredited. I think we need to get the word out about really sort of those kinds of things. We have a pretty exciting program though, where it's a piece within a course where they're actually exploring, teaching providers sort of painting and art skills to then help the patients use that as another mechanism to help with sort of the ability to calm. And we all know that not only does food have an impact, but also the arts. So art medicine and music and all those other kinds of therapies. So I thought that was pretty unique. We saw that one come across this year. So another space that we're exploring.
Super cool.
Great. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you guys. I love these sessions that kind of get everybody kind of thinking creatively. We have a lot of creativity in CME, and these kind of ideas, I think kind of get everybody kind of, being able to think about how they can evolve their own programming. I know that I've sat through sessions with a couple of you guys in the past, and been able to kind of pick pieces that I said, okay, I think I can do this in some of the future things that I'm involved in. So I want to thank you guys all for your time. So for those folks who are watching this live or watching the recorded version, there is a short survey affiliate attached to CME Palooza Fall. It's only 7 questions, but we do use the results to help plan our future iterations of CME Palooza. So the link to the survey is on the live tab where you are watching this, hopefully today. So to view the next session, which will start here in about 8 minutes, you will need to refresh your browser before the top of the hour, and that session will be then available to be viewed at that time. So with that, I want to thank Amanda, I want to thank Peggy and Marcy and Kara for their time today, and to thank all of our viewers, and we will see you again very soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Thanks.